but Nova Scotia exports about $3.6 billion, somewhere in that range, heading towards $4 billion. That's a lot. That's a lot of friendship, and that's a lot of trade. And
Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Scotty Greenwood and Chris Sands.
Welcome back to Canusa Street. This is very exciting today because we are in our studio at the Woodrow Wilson Center for the first time. This was a COVID project that Chris Sands and I started, and everything's been virtual, so it's so exciting to be in person. And it's really wonderful today, Chris, because we have the Premier of Nova Scotia with us in person, his first trip to D.C., and it's great to welcome him in the studio. So I know you'll introduce him properly, but delighted to have him.
I'm delighted to have him, too. First of all, it's nice to do a podcast when we're all in the same room together. Very COVID safe, but there's just something about being in the room with Scotty that lifts my spirits all the time.
Well, and you're wearing your Nova Scotia tie, Chris, so that's an excellent bit of sucking
pandering.
On. That's
Sorry.
right. So we promise we're going to let you talk, Premier. But why don't before we get going, why don't we have Chris introduce you properly, and then we'll just have a conversation for as long as you'll put up with us.
awesome. Can't wait to see what he says in a formal introduction.
There you go.
Well, nothing too formal, but for those Americans who are not following Canadian politics, and there are some, Tim Houston is Nova Scotia's premier and the equivalent of a governor of a state. He is a relatively recently elected one, actually took office in 2021, has been in the Nova Scotia legislature since 2013, if I remember correctly. And he's here in Washington on a very special mission that has a lot to do with Nova Scotia history. So I want to leave that for our conversation, but we're really delighted to have you, the first premier we've ever had on this program.
I'm honored to be here, and first trip to D.C. and first in-person guest on the podcast.
That's exactly right. We're breaking all kinds of new ground. Yeah. And
Happy to be here.
We've all been vaccinated a million times. Well, so I guess I'll just start, Premier. What brings you to, obviously Canusa Street, but in addition to this, what brings you to Washington?
Yeah, we definitely had to build some stuff around this podcast, but we were able to. But we're look. This is Chris is right. We had an August election, so I was elected premier in August. So I was leader of the opposition for 3 years, and I've been in politics for about 8 years. So, but look, as premier, doing first kind of trade mission, quote unquote. I like the description of mission, but it was really important to come here. This is about relationship building. We've been having meetings talking about trade. And also Christmas trees, because Nova Scotia Christmas tree growers sends a Christmas tree to the embassy here in Washington every year and has for about 30 years. We're going to light that. We're going to be part of that ceremony. Looking forward to that. And then head on to Boston, where we light a Christmas tree in Boston, too, which is of great significance to the people of Nova Scotia.
Yeah, tell us about that, because the Boston connection goes back even further. But what was the origin of that?
Yeah, so it goes back to the relationship between kind of New England and certainly Boston and Nova Scotia goes way, way back. But the significance of the Christmas tree is in 1917. We had a massive explosion. 2 ships collided in the Halifax harbor. One was laden down with munitions, and it leveled a big part of the city. It happened on December 6th at 9:04 in the morning, and there was thousands of people that perished and thousands more injured. A lot were blinded from flying glass and everything. But so that happened in the morning, and by 10 o'clock that evening, the people of Boston had loaded a train with provisions and medical personnel, and we're sending help. So every year, Nova Scotia recognizes that and says thank you. And for the last number of years, that thank you has come in the form of a Christmas tree, which stays on the Boston Commons and in lots of ways signifies the start of the holiday season in that area. But it's a constant reminder of Nova Scotia's time of need. People were there to support them, and we won't forget that.
Well, it's one thing that we always talk about on Canusa Street. There is a sort of neighborly quality to Canada's relations, and these little gestures, the little rituals, I think give an extra meaning to it. And so I'm so glad that you've kept the tradition going. Also, I'm glad that it's not a gift to the president or something like that, but something that's really between the people. Because I'll be a bit corny. I think the Canada-U.S. relationship is a relationship between the people, and those of us who sort of study it or participate in the policy side are just trying not to mess that up.
Absolutely right. And the tree that's here at the embassy in Washington comes from a family in Nova Scotia. Jim DeLong and his family in New Germany, Nova Scotia have they pay for that tree to come down, and it's I spoke to Jim last night actually about the significance of it, and he just said, "Is there any message you want me to send?" He said, "Just Merry Christmas and remember your friends." It was as simple as that, right? So,
the tree would have taken, years and decades to grow. This is a big tree at the embassy. It's right on Pennsylvania Avenue, right? So
yeah.
He's been taking care. He and his family have been watering it, trimming it, nourishing it for what, 50, 60 years?
Yeah,
something like that?
The tree in Boston is particularly, I think that has to be, I think there's some standards, and it's a competition. People will apply to have their tree selected.
Nice.
And that'll be like a 60-footer. That's a significant tree. But the sentiment of both of them is the same. And you're right, Chris. It's the people. It's the people of Nova Scotia sending these thank yous.
That's great.
It'll continue.
Yeah.
So that's an important part of the trip for us as well. And but a lot of good discussions just about trade, just relationships. Nova Scotia, we have about 27,000 Nova Scotians whose jobs depend on trade. We export a lot. Obviously, U.S. in general is a huge trading partner for Canada. But Nova Scotia exports about over $3.6 billion, somewhere in that range, heading towards $4 billion. That's a lot. That's a lot of friendship, and that's a lot of trade, and we're very proud of it. So that's why I'm here. First trip was here to our friends south of the border.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's you come at a time when we think we're opening back up because of COVID, but yet there's a new variant, and so everyone has to be awfully careful. Talk to us a little bit, if you would, Premier. You were elected during the pandemic and have governed since then. What has Nova Scotia's approach been, and what are your observations about governing during this terrible period?
Yeah, it is a good way to describe it, actually. But certainly campaigning during a pandemic was interesting, and then forming a government. But Nova Scotians are very proud of our response to COVID, and I give a lot of credit to my predecessor, Premier McNeil. Was kind of very proactive on listening to public health, and Nova Scotians responded in kind. You remember, go back to March 2020. We were all just a little kind of freaked out, and we needed good leadership, and we got it from Dr. Strang is our chief medical officer, and he's a bit of a folk hero in Nova Scotia right now, and well earned for sure. But we took early steps to force isolations, 14-day isolations on people entering Nova Scotia, ultimately closing down our border at times. We had a couple of lockdowns, but there was a lot of uncertainty, and there still is with the variants, but we know a lot more now. But I always think back to at that time when washing our groceries and all kinds of stuff, right? We really just didn't know, but now we have the vaccines. We have a high, almost 90% of Nova Scotians vaccinated. So we support the science on that and support public health, and we've done well. And we've been able to kind of come out of it. Good.
One thing that I know some people have heard of is you had the maritime bubble. Talk about that a little bit, because it wasn't just Nova Scotia there.
Yeah. The Atlantic bubble was kind of, and it helped us salvage a bit of the tourism season. So we had, movement, between New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland. That was the bubble, and cooperation from the governments, from the public health, just to make sure that, because there's a lot of, it's like you think of the border towns along the Canada-U.S. border. There's a lot of movement back and forth. Well, just magnify that in the provinces. People in New Brunswick have family in Nova Scotia. They might work in Nova Scotia back and forth. So once we had a bit of confidence on where things would go and got the vaccination rates up, and people could move, and that did salvage a lot of our tourism, and other parts of our trade. So, but everyone kind of got bought into it, and Atlantic Canada got some recognition around the world for the management of the pandemic.
I know. I talked to some people in Maine who wanted to join the bubble. They were thinking maybe that would be a better option than the U.S. sometimes. So,
well, I mean, the New England governors and Atlantic Canadian premiers have been getting together longer, I think, than any two subnational groups in our history. Premier, you mentioned Nova Scotia exports to the United States and business, and that is really important to people's livelihoods on both sides of the border. And we just talked for a moment about tourism, but I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I have to say, Chris, I don't know how much time you've spent in Nova Scotia. I've had an amazing opportunity to travel all around the province. I mean, I don't even want to start name dropping here, because it's phenomenal. I was just in Halifax a couple of weeks ago for the Halifax International Security Forum. So what do you look for in terms of welcoming people back when it's safe to do so? How important is that from a tourism and travel point of view? And then maybe we can talk about the Halifax Security Forum, because I know that's a flagship really for Canada and the free world, really. So we can talk about that too.
Yeah, the Security Forum is an important thing, but you didn't answer. Have you had a chance to get to Nova Scotia yet?
I have not since the beginning of the pandemic,
okay,
but I have been before, and I can't wait to get back.
And you're wearing the tie today.
And I'm wearing the tie.
So you're sporting it. That's really good.
We like the pandering with the tie for sure. But like Nova Scotia, it's Nova Scotians have a real homing device. Like they may move away and go live somewhere, but they generally come home, and we have a beautiful province. There's lots of parts of the world that are beautiful, but we're particularly proud. Our Blue Nosers are proud of our province. You can come hike the Highlands. We have a wine country in the valley. You can have a pint in Halifax and many pubs, and world-class golfing, and the shoreline is just something that myself, I was touring a bit of Cape Breton this week, and even as a Nova Scotian, you look at the shoreline and you're like, wow, we're lucky.
Yeah, it's
so
amazing. The Cabot Trail up there is spectacular.
It really is. So we're proud of what we have to offer, and as a new government, one of our goals is we're heavy on population growth. I've set a goal to double the population of Nova Scotia over the next 40 years, from 1 million to 2 million. So tourism.
How are you going to do that?
Yeah, so tourism plays into that. That's why I want to kind of mention it there, because a lot of people, when they come on vacation, they might move back, or they tell other people, and the more people that we can get to Nova Scotia to showcase what we have to offer, the more likely it is that they'll come and build their life there. And through the pandemic, people really they really looked at their own quality of life. Mm-hmm. And they looked at what we had in Nova Scotia, and more people said, wow, that's what we want, right? So we're proud of our province. We're proud of what we have to offer, and our tourism opportunities just open up so many doors overall in what we're trying to do as a province.
I didn't know about your goal of increasing the population, but just to workshop it here, Chris, on Canusa Street, because we're all about how, you've got some great universities too, and it seems to me, as a parent of three kids, one's out of university, one's in, and then one's maybe going. Okay. It's pretty expensive in the United States, and Canada has some fabulous options.
Absolutely.
And Nova Scotia, in particular, has some fantastic places to study. I wonder if that's a way. If you can get some. There's a cost advantage. It's not as far away as Americans think. And as you say, it's gorgeous. So I wonder if university students might be a way to increase also.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of people that come to Nova Scotia, to one of our incredible post-secondary institutions, and some of them stay, but we want more to stay, and that means having a strong economy where there's opportunities for them, which is coming as well. But when you think about some of our university towns, it's a great experience for young people, and that's as we talk about population growth, there's a lot of people that have ties to Nova Scotia, whether they're family ties, whether they came to school there, whether they passed through at some point in time, but certainly those that went to school in Nova Scotia have that connection. If we can start to tap into them and tell them about opportunities to come back, I think there's a great opportunity there.
That's a fantastic thought. I know when I'm teaching at Johns Hopkins, I often get students who are not American who want to see me because they think, well, the U.S. might allow them when they graduate to have a year to stay in the U.S. and then they are sent home. Sometimes brilliant students who we should be trying to keep in the U.S. One of the things most international students in the U.S. know is that Canada is a welcoming place, and if you want to stay in North America and just continue your education and deepen what you know about this region, I think Nova Scotia, Canada generally, are great places to go.
Send those students up to me.
Only the good ones. If they don't pass my class, we're not sending them.
Your class is pretty
deal.
tough, though. We talked a bit about the Halifax Security Forum, but again, it's the world comes to Halifax every fall to talk about peace and security. So maybe getting some of those folks to get their second homes or move in. But one of the topics this year in Halifax having to do with the movement of people, it's not just about students and families and tourists, but also refugees. And I wonder if that's part of Canada's secret sauce, if you will, being, as Chris mentioned, it's a welcoming place at a time in the world where countries are closing, they're looking inward. How is Canada and how has Nova Scotia managed to keep that global outlook, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Immigration policy is it's something that's really important, and I think Nova Scotians and Canadians in general are welcoming. It's something that even over the last 10 years, you probably see a little bit of a shift towards even more welcoming as people, technology and all these types of things open people's eyes and educate them a bit more. But we want people to see Nova Scotia as the place where they can invest, where they can build their life and really thrive there. And more people are seeing that. And I think I'm excited about the opportunities, and that's a lot of the meetings we'll have in Boston and here too are about opportunities to invest and build businesses and create jobs in Nova Scotia, because I do believe that there'll be a return to more regional manufacturing. We've seen major supply chain disruptions, and if you look at Nova Scotia, I mean, where we did well with the pandemic, a lot of plants and places of business could continue to operate more so than other jurisdictions. So productivity remained relatively high, and it's a nice, safe environment with a great quality of life, and you can get you can get to 200 million customers. You can get to Chicago in a pretty good truck and all this type of stuff. So I think there's incredible opportunities for economic growth, to increase trade, and the thing about the obviously the United States is a huge market, but also the consumer in the United States pushes our companies to be more innovative and be more creative and really more responsive to demand. So the relationship goes two ways. It's one that we value tremendously.
Was one of the things I remember from one of my trips up was my fellow Michigander, Tom Selleck, was doing was the Jesse
And your
Stone
twin
Mysteries.
brother.
Yeah, not my twin brother. I don't have a mustache. For those of you who can't see it. But one of the things he had commented on doing filming near Blue Rocks was that Nova Scotians, unlike people in Hollywood and so on, they weren't in your face. There was a sort of respect for you. You're doing your thing, and people, still excited to see you. But there was a kind of more British sensibility of being friendly and welcoming, but letting people have a good time and keep to themselves if that's what they wanted to do. And I always found that part of the culture reminds me of the UK, reminds me of other places, but it's a really special place in that even when you're a really big deal in the United States, you can come and you can feel at home and not constantly under a microscope when you're visiting Nova Scotia, which is
I'm happy to hear that, and I believe that to be the case too. And obviously we talk about tourism, but the film industry is something I'm passionate about as well, because it also pushes a positive image of Nova Scotia on big screens, and I do hear that from a lot of celebrities that come to Nova Scotia. I mean, certainly Nova Scotians are elbowing each other and saying, "Hey, look, it's there's Tom Selleck over there, right?" There's no question that's happening.
Sure,
but they're probably not sticking a camera in your face, So I think that's all part of just the spirit of Nova Scotia, really.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
One of the things that strikes me in listening to your approach to Washington and going from here to Boston that I think is really great to hear is none of this feels partisan. None of this feels like federal, provincial, Canada versus U.S. It feels like we're in this together, and we've got to move forward. Roger Kusner is the Canadian Consul General in Boston. He's from Nova Scotia. What a terrific guy! A hockey coach, a member of Parliament, and now the consul. Canada's top diplomat.
Poet.
A poet. I'm sure you'll see him when you're there. I'm sure he's. I mean, I would think he's helping you with the trip, and that's kind of pulling everyone together for the greater good, right? I mean, that sort of sounds like a good model to me.
Yeah, it's a Nova Scotian approach. Like, it really is. Nova Scotia politics it's kind of close to the center in most ways. There's not, there's nothing as much as the extremes, let's say. There's still a little bit, but
you fall off the edge of the island if you get too far left or right, right?
You're in the minority then, for sure. But
I've been in your legislative building. You're never very far from other people. I know you probably have social distancing now, but if somebody was really out of control, it wouldn't take much for them to come and punch you. So you have to be disciplined and not get hit.
That may be part of it, I guess. But look, it's politics is about people. And it's easy to forget that, but you have to kind of reel yourself back in, and I think we make a concerted effort to remember that more than we forget it, and it's not always easy, but we do it.
I want to ask you also about energy, because it always comes up here. We're all talking about energy and trying to green the planet. People will know. Some of our listeners will know that Nova Scotia through Sable Island had a big gas play. There was coal mining in Cape Breton, and you have different traditions. Where are you on the energy mix? We just had the Prime Minister and of course our President come back from Glasgow, the other Scotland, the old Scotland. But where's Nova Scotia on transition to net zero? And how do you see that?
Yeah, it's we're on the same page as the Prime Minister and the federal government. We just passed some very kind of aggressive environmental legislation. Our first sitting of the House here. We still burn a lot of coal. I mean, we're a coal mining province, and we're trying to move away from that. And certainly we've taken a lot of steps to green our grid over the last 10, 15 years, and Nova Scotians have some of the highest power rates because of that. We've invested heavily in greening the grid, but we have a lot left. There's a lot of room to go yet. And when you look at Canada's goal to get off coal, most of the cost of getting off coal will fall to Nova Scotia. In Atlantic Canada.
Really?
It's in the range of 50% of the cost to get off coal would fall to Atlantic Canada. So we're concerned about that. We know what we need to do, but we need to protect the ratepayers as well. They can't shoulder this all on their own, especially coming out of a pandemic and with our power rates the way they are. So we're looking at hydro. There's an opportunity for the Atlantic Loop where we buy hydro from Quebec. We have hydro coming from Newfoundland now, but there's big investments that are required to make that transition and build the transmission line. So we're actively working with the federal government to look for support for the ratepayers of Nova Scotia. We know what we need to do. We know what's right. But we have to protect the ratepayers in doing it. So it's a topical discussion.
It is.
Sure.
And, it's a hot topic here because, of course, we're also trying to move off coal, but there are important politicians, including Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, represents a lot of coal miners. And it seems to me if anything is developing now after COP26, it's the sense that we can't have one segment of society pay all the price of the transition. We have to think about their future. And it reminded me of when the federal government shut down the cod fishery in the Atlantic. And it was for the good of the planet, for the good of the species, but it put a lot of people out of work. And how you transition them to new ways of making a living and to having quality of life, because it's not their fault that they were in an industry you had to shut down. How do you think that that earlier episode with the fishery now kind of tempers the way Nova Scotians look at the transition away from coal? Are you going to be able to take care of the people who are in that field?
We that's our goal. I mean, we're very, very focused on, as I said, on people. So, but small province, so we need the federal government to be there with us. And we've had those discussions. And we'll continue to have them. And I am optimistic that the federal government, on behalf of Canadians, will recognize that this is a big hit. It's the right thing to do, and we're going to support Nova Scotians while they make that transition, and those working directly in the industry. We worry about them, but they also know that the world changes, and nobody can stop progress.
Well,
so we just have to manage it.
Absolutely. And Chris, I think it's a subject for a whole nother podcast when we think about energy transition, because the other thing about Nova Scotia is it's home to the Bay of Fundy, the largest tidal change in the world. And there's been so much research done right in Nova Scotia about tidal power, the power of the moon, which you can set your watch to. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. But the tides, are
time and tide wait for no man.
There you go. So there's some interesting. There are lots of hiccups, lots of history there. But that's something again. Maybe a whole nother podcast to talk about tidal power sometime.
I'd be happy to come back and do that for sure, because we are going to make it a thing to come and light this tree in Washington and build that relationship. So we'll be back. We talk about that. We talk about hydrogen too. Because I also think that we can use the Bay of Fundy to manufacture hydrogen. I think there's huge opportunities in the energy space for sure, but we have to get there.
Yeah.
And there's big investments to get there. But I think if we make the right investments, we can really unleash some potential.
I'm so glad you mentioned hydrogen, Premier, because the bills that are being debated in Congress today, literally this week, have a ton of investment in things like hydrogen supercenters. And part of our hobby horse is whatever Canada and the United States are doing, we should figure out ways to do it together. So I know I'm assuming one of your messages to the policymakers that you interact with is, let's not build barriers to each other. Let's not have Buy American provisions or content provisions that would exclude each other. Because when the time comes, Nova Scotia innovation on hydrogen, U.S. facilities on hydrogen, we're going to want to benefit from each other's knowledge on that. And we've got to build the pathways for that and not collaborate together to solve the big problems, not compete against each other. At least that's my point of view.
We're definitely on that page. The relationship is important.
That's right.
It's really important for both nations. I mean, there's a lot of trade that goes back and forth, and we're big consumers of American products, right? Just as they are of Canadian products. So these are important relationships, and absolutely, that's the message is that we're friends.
This is a really small question I had to ask, but I know that when we decided to restrict the border to manage COVID, one of the things that the U.S. did, we didn't restrict air travel, but we did restrict the land border and ferries. So how's the ferry to Yarmouth doing? And has it been mothballed? Will it come back this year? What's the sense of what's going on with that?
The link is important.
Yeah.
I've been kind of an outspoken critic of the structure of the deal that's been in place. We've invested a lot in that ferry service, and we haven't received the benefit of that just yet. So we're optimistic that we're in a long-term contract. So we're working with that at what's in front of us. But we're optimistic that we could see a return of that ferry service next year. It's been a couple of years.
It's been a couple of years, yeah. Before COVID, even.
Before COVID, there were
I was
problems.
in Yarmouth, and there was no ferry. Which was fine because I had no interest in going back to Maine.
They've had problems with the port. They've had problems with the vessel, mechanical issues. They've had problems with the scheduling. So, but what I would say is the connection is important, and we're focused on getting it right. That means the right deal. Taxpayers will invest in it for sure, but it has to be on the right terms, and it's a two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know you've got a busy afternoon ahead of you. I'm so grateful that you came over, and Chris, that you put together this great studio setup where we're live and in person. I feel like I want to run home and get my Halifax scarf before the tree lighting because you're putting us all to shame. But your investment in relationships and your physically showing up makes such a huge difference. And so, good for you. Thank you for coming. Yeah. Thank you for coming to Canusa Street.
And come back soon.
Come back soon, and we'll give the last word to you.
Well, I'm thrilled by the tie. I really am. And we'll see what we can do. I
have a scarf. I do
have these pins.
Oh, very good.
Make sure before we leave, we get a couple of these pins.
Definitely.
But, this has been great, and thank you for having me on. And I do look forward to being back. But thank you for constantly shining a light on the importance of the relationship between the two countries. And there's going to be irritants from time to time, as there is with every relationship. But what we do is we work through those, and that's our focus.
The holidays are coming. We all know the problems of our families, but we're going to work through them.
Absolutely.
Well, we have nothing else to do. Chris and I focus on Canada-U.S. relations all day, every day. So thanks for giving us
Yes.
a reason to get together, because otherwise it's just the two of us, talking about PEI potato wart or something. It's just a disaster.
No, we don't
Hopefully we'll solve that.
PEI. He'll take it back, and we'll be in trouble with the PEI people.
Well, but that's an issue this week, and as we know, the Canadian Trade Minister is also in town,
right.
and between lumber and digital services tax and PEI potatoes, there's plenty to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about, and actually, I was in Ottawa last week, and I was advocating for PEI while I was there, because what's good for Atlantic Canada is good for Atlantic Canada, and when we have a neighboring province that gets hit with a setback, it's incumbent on all of us to kind of raise our voice. So happy to talk about the potato warts and PEI, but I'll leave that to my good friend Premier Dennis King.
Yeah,
would love to have on here.
Actually, we will. I mean, that's a whole other podcast too, and maybe the governor of Puerto Rico, because I'll just leave you with this thought, Chris. There is a shipment of PEI potatoes going to Puerto Rico, and the U.S. government has stopped it, even though there isn't a risk to human health. And Puerto Rico gets its fresh potatoes only from PEI. So you don't want to have Christmas without your mashed potatoes.
No,
so we have to solve this. And I think we'll invite the governor of Puerto Rico and the premier of Prince Edward Island. And again, that's a whole other podcast. And
I mentioned Tom Selleck. We'll forget Magnum PEI. It'll be PEI.
That's right.
I love it. Thanks so much, guys. Really
Thank you so much,
appreciate it.
Premier. Yeah, great to see you.
Thanks for coming.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.